Hello. Hello.
Nice to see you.
Yes. We are allowing our viewers to join. They're flowing in, which is great. How are you?
I am doing well. Thank you for having me here. It's
Yes.
always nice being with you all.
I know. We love you too. You know, we adore you.
Yeah.
And you are so valuable to so many people. So thank you for taking the time to do this. Um, so for everyone who's flowing in, my name is Ebony. I am one of the founding curators for the Mama Soko Collective. And we have with us today Mama Sarahn, who is the grand midwife for Birth in the Tradition.
Yeah.
She's joining us today to speak about grand midwifery and just how we navigate pregnancy in this age of a pandemic. And so, without further ado, we're going to get started and we'll just let people flow in. We'll be here for about 30 minutes for those of you who have already started to join. So, stick with us here and you're going to learn a lot of great information. And we'll make sure that you're able to get in touch with Mama Sarahn if you have any questions in the future. And I'll also, before I let you start, I also want to share that Mama Sarahn was my midwife when I had a home birth with my son. He's down, I think, like 19 months. And it was amazing. I did my entire pregnancy, all my prenatal care through Mama Sarahn, and birthed him at home. And it was so much better than when I had my hospital birth 5 years ago. So it's just my little nugget that I love to share with people.
Well, thank you. Yeah, you had a great pregnancy and you had a great birth. And I think that one of the things that helps us to have a great birth is taking care of ourselves. And you did a really good job at taking care of yourself, which is the main punch that I want to put in today's message to everybody. But first, about Grant, I can't start without first giving honor and praises to all the grand midwives that came before me. I had the honor and the privilege, myself and my partner, Nasra, Mama Nasra, to actually make friends with the last of the grand midwives back in the days when people would call them granny midwives then. She was the last one that was certified through the health department, but the last one to retire. And we got to know her. Nasser got a chance to go to a couple of births with her. I had the opportunity to stay in touch with her throughout the remaining of her life. She passed away, rest in peace, Miss Rilla Smiley. She passed away, but she, the generation of midwives that I come into is what Shafia Monroe Consultants gave us as the soul system midwives. So we're the midwives that came in during the 70s and during the 80s. But prior to us coming were the grand midwives. And the grand midwives um, went through the civil rights era. They went through the Jim Crow eras, all the way back to slavery days where they were called granny midwives. We arrived here on these shores during the slavery days with midwives on that ship. And midwifery was one of those crafts that had been passed down from mother to daughter, or from somebody that an existing midwife saw something in someone and brought them into midwifery. It was not a profession back then where you went to school. You just had a knack for it. And that's how it continued on to be until even till today. Well, today you do have, schools and whatnot, but usually, especially up to my generation of midwives, I came in 1980. You were brought in by somebody. And usually the granny midwives, the grand midwives, because I'm talking about different eras. I'm talking about from the time that we arrived here till about till when slavery ended. You had that granny midwife, and then and up to, I'm sorry, all the way up until the civil rights era, you had your granny midwife. It wasn't until in 1981 that myself and a group of other women, other midwives and childbirth educators, Black midwives and childbirth educators, we came together and had a conference here in Atlanta. And we invited some of the last of the living granny midwives on second transition into granny midwives from Alabama and Georgia to come and join us so that we could sit at their feet and hear their wisdom, hear their stories. And for an entire weekend, we were privileged in being able to do that. And one of the privileges is that you have generations of midwives back then who, some of them, like in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and 60s, were trained by the health department, but a lot of the skills and a lot of the wit and the tricks of the trade were passed down from mother to daughter, all the way from the time that we arrived here and living, where we came from Africa or wherever. And so when I think about the terms that we are accustomed to hearing and the terms that they preferred to be called, they were called granny midwives, but oftentimes they felt like, and this is their words, a lot of times they felt like that was a derogatory term. It was almost like somebody calling a guy uncle or boy or whatever, but nobody voiced, we didn't have a voice then. And so we gave them a voice. We were like, well, let's change that. If granny was not befitting, you don't like the term granny, let's give you another another title that honors you. And so for that entire weekend, we threw around different names on the table. Not threw, we put different names on the table, and we came back to grand, and they liked it. And from that moment on, we pushed for the term to be replaced, grand replacing granny. And it took a while, but today, if you surf through the internet, you'll see grand midwife, being referred to as the midwives that came before our generation. I feel privileged because I am here in Atlanta, Georgia, where midwifery is steeped in tradition. And because, especially in rural areas where hospitals and doctors were few, grand midwives flourished and continued on for a long while, thus giving me the opportunity to have met the last of the grand midwives, Miss Arilla Smiley. And so we're talking about a time period not long ago, you all. I want everybody to realize that we did not start having our babies in the hospital until really less than 100 years ago, maybe about 70 something years ago, 80 something years ago at most. And so having your baby at home with a midwife is not something that is prehistoric or old fashioned, or that's the way that we didn't have any choices. We didn't have a choice. But as we are seeing today, midwives and home birth is being overpopulated Caucasian, by Caucasians who realize now that what we had going on, even though it was considered second class, is actually first class. Why is it first class? Because you take charge. You take charge in who you select to be your midwife. Perhaps you have interviewed several of them until you found one that matched your beliefs, that matched your philosophy about pregnancy and birth. Um, um, there's so much more information that's available to us because of the internet. I think that when we present maybe to our parents that we're planning to have our babies at home,
Hmm.
they're miscombobulated by it because they only know what they know.
Yep.
But when we remind them that they might have been at home or born at home, or that their mothers might have been born at home, and every grandmother from the beginning of time was born at home, then they come around. Okay, they come around. And they come around and realizing, hopefully, and realizing, and this is something that I want to just to remind us, back in those days when we were having our babies at home, and midwives were serving us, the midwife that lived in your community that was in walking distance to you, there was a lot more community, there was a lot more conversation, everybody knew everybody. You know, you went to the same church. If you shopped at the general store to get your flour or to get your rice, you saw your friends, your neighbors. If you were pregnant, then the women did not hold their tongue to give you advice of what kind of herbs to drink during your pregnancy and what kind of herbs to drink to prepare for birth and what type of foods to avoid and what foods to eat more of. Those were your doulas. The women in your church, the women in your community, those were your doulas, okay? And and there's just so much more to say. People then also, this is what I like to do when I'm first talking with somebody at a consultation. I tell them I want them to see themselves as their great grandmothers, as their foremothers, and don't see themselves so much what they see other women doing on YouTube and whatnot. That's good too. That's empowering also because you can see yourself. When you see other people birthing on YouTube at home, then you see yourself, okay, I can do this. However, what we need to do is we need to really go back to how the lifestyles of our foremothers. We need to think about the foods that they ate back then. When you got married and you got yourself a home, the first thing that you did was you dug yourself up a garden in the backyard and you grew food so that you can feed your family. And if you were fortunate enough to have a pond in your backyard, well, then you had fish. And then, of course, you had chickens. You might have had pig and you might have had a cow, but that's okay because back then they were all grain fed and grass fed and everything was organic and so and her physical self was a lot more stronger than today's mother. Today a lot of us do work office jobs where we sit a lot, and so we don't have the same kind of physical activity. We have to join classes, you know, prenatal yoga classes, prenatal swimming classes, or whatever, whereas our foremothers, she walked where she needed to go. If she went to church, if she went to the general store, if she went to her neighbor, she walked. And sometimes she walked miles. When she washed clothes, she was out there washing clothes by hand and hanging them up on the clothesline by hand. And when she was dealing with the gardening is no joke. Gardening is work. You got to get out there and weed that garden almost every single day and tend to it. And so she was a lot more physical. And so what I want to do is just kind of bring it home. I want to bring it fast forward actually, because our time goes by really, really fast. I only got 50, I've spoke 15 minutes and there's already 15 minutes left. Um, we are living in an era where change was necessary. Change was necessary when it comes to maternity care, especially in our community. Our maternal mortality rates in the United States are high. Our maternal mortality rates in Georgia are the highest. Our maternal mortality rates in Georgia are higher than some of the developing countries around the world. And that doesn't make sense. We got major hospitals right here in Atlanta. So that does not make any sense. When I think about people like Serena Williams, I applaud Serena Williams because Serena Williams was one of those women that was on that fine line of being here and being there because she knew her body, because she knew her medical history, because she knew the condition of her blood. she advocated, but she had to advocate really, really strong and loud to get their attention in order for them to stop what they were doing and pay attention to what it was that was going